Hey up everyone. Today I'm going to have a bit of fun again, and for anyone with a sensitive disposition it might be better to turn off now. This video does come with a warning of extreme sarcasm. Motorcycle designers have a thankless job in many ways. Whatever they produce, someone will find fault with it in some way or another, but some bikes just make that too easy. The following 5 bikes are also by no means the only motorcycles that have been built but shouldn't have been. For those that haven't seen it, there are 10 of them in the world's worst bikes video. I will link it at the end, but there are many more. Some may have had some good points, but whether it's a useless engine, a rubber chassis, or just ridiculous styling, they all had such big problems that I can honestly say I think the world would have been a better place without them. In some, the whole concept was flawed. If you own one and love it, tell me about it in the comments. I know there will be a whole raft of comments from one community in particular, but like I said, this is just a bit of fun really. I hope it makes you smile. If you do enjoy it, try to remember to like the video. It costs nothing and helps the channel a lot. And if you subscribe, it means, in theory at least, that you get to find out first when our latest videos are released. There is a second backup channel called BAREBONESMC.MyMotorcycleMadness too. It's part of my ongoing efforts to try and keep the YouTube gods happy. So come join us there if you haven't already. I do link other interesting videos made by other real bikers around the world on the community tab on the main channel page too, so it's always worth taking a look there to see what's happening. Anyway, let's dive into this short list of 5 ridiculous motorcycles that should never have been built. First, and as usual probably the most obvious, is the BMW C1. To this day, I really don't know what the BMW C1 is or was trying to be. Reminiscent of our old friend the Quasar, at least the Quasar had a 750cc engine. The C1 was absolutely terrible in comparison. Overweight, underpowered, unreliable, and with handling I once heard described as the work of the devil, it had few saving graces. A 15 horsepower 125cc engine in a bike that weighs over 185 kilos or 407 pounds gave it the performance of a snail, and the aerodynamic profile of a brick wall didn't help. Even when they put a 200cc engine in, it made no difference. Top speed would still not get beyond about 65 miles an hour, but that was a blessing, because handling at any speed was like a rhino on a skating rink. It was the first scooter BMW ever built, and adding a roof and windscreen meant everybody hated it. The scooter riders wanted style, and the people who rode a moped to work wanted cheap and reliable, and the BMW failed miserably at everything. No self-respecting biker would be seen dead in one. This was one of the industry's failed attempts to lure car drivers out of their 4-wheeled chariots into the world of 2 wheels. But after technically selling around 10,000 units worldwide in the first year, most of them sat in showrooms going nowhere, and there was no repeat orders. A year later, the best BMW could do was to clear 2,000 units worldwide at knockdown prices. They were riddled with faults. Oil lights would come on randomly or stop working completely. Windscreen wipers didn't work. Front wheel bearings failed more often than I changed my socks. And the fork stanchions came pitted from the factory. So I don't suppose any seals ever stood a chance really. It also had one fault that is scary, not just because it plunges you into complete darkness at the worst possible moment, but because it really is the only motorcycle or car I have ever heard of that has an overheating headlight. How badly must they have designed that headlamp housing for it to make a halogen bulb overheat? The idea of the C1 was to convince car drivers that motorcycles weren't dangerous. BMW claimed it was as safe in an impact as a small family car, but I for one won't be playing crash test dummies in one. It was so successful that despite all the costs in R&D, BMW only made it for 2 years, and in 2002 it was dropped from the range, thankfully. Anyway, enough of that, let's move on. This time to Italy, and we have the Gilera CX125. Now this is a hard one for me, because I like Gilera. Federico Martini was a master designer, and when Gilera decided they wanted him to design a bike for them, the Gilera CX125 was born. And to call it an oddity is the understatement of the century. Behind that tiny 125cc two-stroke engine is a very complicated and over-engineered motorcycle. What is it they say? Keep it simple, stupid. R&D must have cost a fortune. And why? For what? Why put all that incredible engineering in a bike with such a tiny engine? A 500cc lump or even a 250 or 350cc engine would have just made so much more sense, and Gilera had them. Yes, you could say changes in the learner regulations played their part, but if you make a 125cc learner version, why not make a full-blown version that's properly fast for buyers who pass their test on the 125? The fully enclosed bodywork was reminiscent of the Elf race bike and made the BMW K1 and Buell Battle Twins look positively underdressed. The fairings stuck out in front like Cyrano de Bergerac's nose and surrounded the top of the front wheel, so they didn't bother to put a front mudguard on. That would have been hard, because they forgot to put one of the fork legs in too, though. Okay, I'm joking. It had a very interesting looking single-sided front suspension, as well as a single-sided swing arm. This meant that depending on which side you were looking at, you saw a very different bike. From one side, it was heavily engineered, a bit busy, and looked bulky. From the other, it looked like the wheels were falling off and the bike was floating on thin air. The wheels were covered on one side with a disc-shaped cowling that looked like a cross between a frisbee and a fake 1960s flying saucer. They looked like the cheap aftermarket hubcaps on my dad's old Ford Cortina. Now, here is where it gets interesting, because there were bikes made with a full 30 horsepower engine, which is not shabby for a 125. That would have put it in direct competition with the Cagiva Mito and Aprilia RS 125s. Unfortunately, for most countries, the bike they got was restricted to just 12 horsepower to comply with newly introduced learner regulations. And it was overcomplicated and expensive, two things a learner rider can do without. It's easy to hate the styling of the Gilera CX125, but like the BMW K1 and Buell Battle Twins, you have to remember we are seeing them from a different era. In their time, they were the height of fashion. Fortunately, fashion has changed. The fully faired design was great for aerodynamics, but no one thought to check that there was enough clearance at full lock. There wasn't. The tyre hit the bodywork, and Gilera didn't bother to put any lock stops on. They've now become collector's items, especially that nose cone, so I guess there's no accounting for taste. I do wish they had built it with a bigger engine. The fact they never did may tell you the real story here. Next, we have an older story to tell. Val Page was a British designer and engineer who is hailed as the visionary who brought us the Triumph Speed Twin. However, he did design some complete monstrosities too. Produced between 1958 and 1965, the Ariel Leader was one of the earlier attempts to draw car owners over to the idea of life on two wheels, and if the Speed Twin was Val Page's finest hour, the Ariel Leader was possibly his lowest ebb. Ariel were broke after the Square 4, and had to come up with something new to claw back some of the market share they had lost. The decision was to build a small, lightweight performance two-stroke engine motorcycle that would mimic some of the successful bikes coming out of Europe at the time. Some will say that the engine was derived from the Adler unit, but much of the engine's design could be put down to the DKW tech that was used to build the Bantam. First and foremost, it was designed not to challenge the big BSA and Triumph twins, but that is a different story. A single tube bicycle type steering stem was never strong enough despite multiple redesigns, and it meant the whole front end flexed like a fishing rod. It felt like you were riding a rocking horse. The two-stroke twin engine had tepid performance to say the least, and was no match for the European two-strokes, which was lucky because the brakes felt like they had been made from a sponge. Its coup de grace was that it was the very first British bike with flashing indicators. Other than that, the only things the literature could brag about was an extendable lifting handle that made it possible for anyone who wasn't a gorilla to put it on its centre stand, and a clock aperture built into the dashboard. Now, if you were going to fit a dashboard on a motorcycle and make a space for a clock, why would you not fit a clock? Talk about cheap! It did have its own hard luggage and a windscreen top extension on the accessory list, but that made the desperate little engine squeal even more. The bike had a monocoque backbone chassis, but it was made from 20 gauge pressed steel panels. Its own builder thought it looked so hideous that he covered it up entirely in another layer of pressed steel bodywork. The problem was, that made it look even worse, as well as weighing more than an elephant. The bodywork, instead of being aerodynamic, worked like a windbreak and helped to kill the bike's already dismal performance even more. And pressed steel in a country where salt is routinely used to keep the roads free of ice in the long winters might explain why so many Ariel Leaders failed to make it to the modern day. The deluded reviewers at MCN voted it as the Bike of the Year in 1959, despite Norton releasing the Model 50 and Jubilee 250, BSA making the M21 and A10, and Triumph building the Tiger, Bonneville and more. Honestly, if this is what MCN thought was the best bike the motorcycle industry had to offer, the revolutionary flashing indicators must have hypnotised them. Now, if it had been an economical moped like the C90, maybe the Leader would have worked out, but it wasn't. And the 250cc two-stroke engine was thirsty, and it was wheezing before you got 60 miles an hour or 95 kilometres an hour. If the wind was in the right direction, you might get an extra few miles or kilometres per hour, but getting them would be painful, and if the wind changed direction, you could be back at 50 mile an hour or 80 kilometres an hour much faster. If the prevailing weather conditions were right and all the stars aligned, on a good day you might get an astounding 70 mile an hour or 110 kilometres per hour. But by then the steering was wobbling like a drunken pensioner after 10 vodka Red Bulls, and the elastic bands it had for suspension had turned it into a bucking bronco. It was only ever happy below 50 miles an hour or 80 kilometres an hour, but I do blame the barn door on the front for that, at least in part. I guess it wasn't such terrible performance for 1958, but that awful front end and brakes that had all the power of a fully drained AA battery, anything faster you were risking a passionate embrace with the tarmac or a tree. On the plus side, it was actually quite a comfortable bike to ride. This was undoubtedly where its strength lay. Looking back now, it's fairly obvious where Honda got the idea of the legendary Cub, but they did it so much better, and the Cub engine was more economical and reliable, so it would always win hands down as a commuter. Anyway, Now we go from one side of the pond to the other, because next we have the Harley-Davidson Topper. The fact that Harley-Davidson has survived at all is a small miracle given some of the momentously bad decisions they have made. We all know the woes of the AMF years still haunt the Harley name, but even before AMF took over, Harley made some horrors. Putting the Harley-Davidson brand name on the tank of a tiny two-stroke shopping trolley was seriously asking for trouble, but that is exactly what they did. It was based around a 165cc single-cylinder two-stroke engine that was a DKW design. As part of the war reparations, Harley and BSA took the DKW blueprints. BSA built the Bantam, which, while not being my favourite bike, was vaguely okay. But Harley-Davidson built the Topper. It was probably one of the worst decisions ever made by the company. It was the first and became the only scooter Harley-Davidson ever produced, and even by Harley standards it was dreadful. You had to start it with a pull cord just like a lawnmower, and just like most lawnmowers, that could be a lengthy and testing process. The 12-inch wheels were driven by a CVT gearbox that ate what little engine power it had, and the 5-inch drum brakes would struggle to stop a bicycle. Suspension at the front was an elongated leading link system that looked like it had been made from matchsticks, and the bodywork looked like it had come from a Lego set. The bodywork hid the internals of the scooter, but kept in the hot air too, so they were plagued with overheating problems. Once stationary, if you didn't kill the engine, in a short time it would try and kill itself. Now, anyone who's stood there trying to start a BSA Bantam will understand the next bit best. Kick it 3 times, and if it doesn't start, go and have a cup of tea, or pull the plug and clean it. But on the Harley Topper, that began by pulling the starting cord. If after 3 pulls you decided to carry on regardless, it just got you nowhere. Now, a foul plug on a Bantam is a 2-minute job to get it out, clean it and put it back. Not on the Topper though. You have all those lovely Lego panels in the way. For crying out loud, the rear foot pegs even had to be removed because they were bolted on through the bodywork as a complete afterthought. Not that you would get very far trying to carry 2 people. That would be like asking a Ford Fiesta engine to pull a tank. In the early models, they forgot to seal the CVT drive, and road dirt would work its way into the gearbox, causing the belts to slip, which was pretty amazing when you consider the engine only produced around 5 horsepower. Sorry, I'm being cruel here, because in its fully unrestricted form, it produced a massive 9 horsepower. Not the 5 it was often restricted to. The thing is, it also came with the option of a sidecar. That would definitely make it a serious contender for the slowest motorcycle ever built. Despite all of this, the Topper had a claimed top speed of 43.5 miles an hour or 70 kilometers an hour. Whether it would get there and was safe to do that speed is another thing entirely. The wheels were solid steel, which passed every stress of every road bump into the fragile leading link front end, which in turn passed most of them onto the rider. To call it a bone shaker is being too kind. Lastly, of course, there was the name, the Topper. Sounding like a cross between a kid's toy and part of a dinner suit, it could top absolutely nothing. Ever. Now that brings us to the bottom of today's list, and just to show you it goes wrong in recent years just as much as it used to, the bike that gets pride of place is the Victory Vision. Now I know these bikes have their fans, at least in North America. I know they're supposed to ride really well, and I know their owners love them. But for crying out loud, it looks like Flash Gordon had an affair with Buck Rogers. Now I love curves, but come on, there is such a concept as too much of a good thing. Maybe I'm wrong, and everybody who rides a bike secretly wants to be the star of their very own sci-fi B-movie. But I doubt it, and the sales seem to agree with me. His sweeping lines are exaggerated and bulbous. They make it look like something Jeremy Coons stuck in an art gallery more than a real motorcycle. The Vision first showed up as a prototype in 2001 and was talked about purely and simply because of the incredible amount of plastic bodywork it had. Lord knows what would be left if it rolled over in a car park. I guess there's always a small market for the most extreme anything, whether that's the biggest engine, the most expensive, the widest tyres or whatever. Someone always has to go one step further. Well, I'm sorry to say that in my honest opinion, the Victory Vision just went about 5 steps too far. If you sit on a Victory Vision, the first thing you will notice is how far away the bars are. Even though they are swept back massively, unless you are a contortionist, you need to be built like an orangutan to reach them. There's no problems with the Polaris built engine, which is a massive 106 cubic inch or over 1700cc. Polaris have a legacy with the great Rotax company at their core, so you know at least the engine will be right. But it's a huge heavy bike, and this kills any chance of any real performance. The response from the throttle is slower than a tortoise in a mud bath. It is grunty though, so if you can find a long wide road, you might be able to overtake something. Just don't try and do it anywhere near a corner. To say there's a lack of ground clearance is a bit like calling a dead rabbit slow. But let's face it, cornering isn't why anyone would ever buy this bike. You would only buy a Victory Vision if you were a fully certified time-served member of the Look at Me brigade. The problem is, you will never know if the people looking at you are smiling or laughing at you. I just can't take the Vision seriously as a touring bike. Imagine rolling into a tiny cobbled village in the mountains of Andalusia, watching all the people and wildlife from miles around run for fear of an alien invasion, and then try and turn the damn thing round. You'll be there all day and still not get out without a forklift truck. So many people have called the Victory Vision ugly, now people just don't even argue. If you are one of the afflicted and own one, you have my respect. Anyone brave enough to ride around on something that hideous deserves that respect at the very least. Well, that's it again for another day, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. I will get around to answering them all in time, but I have got a bit of a backlog. If you got this far and haven't already, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Subscribing does help a lot and means you get to find out first when our regular updates, news, views and other videos go out, at least in theory. Please share the video with anyone you think will be interested too if you could. This is one of the things that helps the most. It kicks the YouTube algorithm into gear and helps to get the channel out there to new viewers. For the best biker t-shirts and other merchandise made by bikers for bikers, you can visit the website or the Red Bull shop linked in the description below too. There are other exciting motorcycle adventures and other stories from the shed and beyond on the website, so why not grab a cuppa and take a look around. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching. I hope you get some great riding in, and remember, keep your spanners close and your keys even closer. Ride free, everyone!